The cashier at the Safeway whispered Brenda's name as a man, not me, kissed her goodbye by the frozen foods. My grocery bag ripped, spilling oranges across the linoleum, a bright, impossible mess. He looked at me then, a smirk widening, and simply said, "Some things just run their course, doesn't they?" Jed reflected on his nearly 2 decades of marriage to Brenda, a relationship forged since high school. His cell phone rang, displaying Brenda's office number, an unusual occurrence that immediately raised his concern. An unfamiliar voice, calm and measured, introduced himself as Dale Miller, a colleague of Brenda's, stating, "This isn't your wife, Mr. Jedediah Taylor." Dale claimed to possess information Jed should know, suggesting an urgent meeting. Jed, initially annoyed, attempted to dismiss the call as a prank, demanding to speak directly with Brenda. Dale's voice hardened significantly, declaring, "Meet me and maybe you can stop her from having an affair." Jed felt a sudden, profound shock, a cold dread creeping into him, and he reluctantly agreed to meet Dale at Spike's restaurant at noon. Upon meeting, Dale suggested they walk around Central Park to ensure their conversation remained private and unheard. Dale then disclosed the stark details of Brenda's affair with Kevin Riley, another colleague from their office, describing their open flirtation. He meticulously outlined their plan for the following night: dinner and dancing at the Hilton, culminating in a hotel room stay. Dale explained Brenda's misguided belief that Jed would somehow accept this infidelity, given he was her only romantic experience. Dale shared his own painful history of a marriage destroyed by an affair, revealing his motivation for warning Jed. Jed was left profoundly shaken, his world tilting, contemplating the imminent destruction of his long-standing marriage. He began his journey home, the bitter truth settling deep within him, utterly uncertain how he would confront Brenda. Jedediah Taylor sat at his kitchen island, the lukewarm coffee mug heavy in his hand, watching the morning light filter through the dusty blinds. 18 years it had been, almost 2 decades with Brenda, a lifetime really, stretching back to senior year homecoming. They had built everything together, brick by brick, from his first beat-up Ford to this house with its slightly sagging porch. The routine was a comfortable blanket: his coffee, her early shift at the office, the quiet hum of a life well-ordered. He thought about the small, familiar things, the way she hummed off-key in the shower, the scent of her lotion on the pillow. It was a solid, dependable existence. His cell phone vibrated on the polished countertop, startling him. He picked it up without looking, then paused. Brenda's office number, that was unusual. She rarely called him from work, unless it was a forgotten lunch or a quick question about dinner. A knot tightened in his stomach. He pressed the answer button. "Hello," he said, his voice a little gruffer than he intended. "Mr. Jedediah Taylor?" The voice on the other end was calm, even-keeled, entirely unfamiliar. It wasn't Brenda. "This isn't your wife." Jed pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen again, confirming the number. It was definitely Brenda's office line. He brought the phone back up. "Who is this?" "Dale Miller. I work with Brenda," the voice explained, still devoid of any urgency, which only made Jed more uneasy. "I have some information I think you should know." Jed felt a prickle of annoyance. This sounded like a sales call, or worse, some kind of office prank. Brenda knew he didn't appreciate games. "Look, if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. Put Brenda on the phone." A slight pause. Then Dale's voice took on an edge, still quiet but unmistakably firm. "Meet me, Mr. Taylor. Meet me at Spike's restaurant downtown at noon. Maybe then you can stop her from having an affair." The words hit Jed like a physical blow, knocking the air out of his lungs. Affair. The world seemed to tilt. The kitchen, the sunlight, his lukewarm coffee, all suddenly out of alignment. His mind struggled to process the sound, the shape of the word. It was impossible. Brenda. Affair. The two simply did not go together. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, began to spread through him, chilling him from the inside out. His hand trembled, slightly. "Spikes," Jed managed to say, the word a dry whisper. "Noon." He hung up before Dale could say anything else, dropping the phone onto the counter as if it were a burning coal. He stood there, staring blankly ahead, the comfortable blanket of his life unraveling before his eyes. At 11:45, Jed pulled his truck into a parking spot a block away from the Spikes. The restaurant was an old-school diner, chrome and red booths, known for its greasy burgers and strong coffee. Dale Miller was already there, seated in a booth near the window, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He was a man of average height, early 50s, with thinning brown hair and a tired set to his eyes. He didn't look like the kind of man to deliver life-shattering news. Jed slid into the opposite side of the booth. "Miller, bum," he said, not offering a hand. Dale nodded, a faint crease between his brows. "Jedediah, thanks for coming." He glanced around the bustling diner. "Maybe we should walk, get some air, talk somewhere private." Jed didn't argue. The thought of discussing Brenda's supposed infidelity over a burger was sickening. They walked out into the crisp autumn air, heading towards the small, municipal Central Park a few blocks away. The leaves crunched under their feet. The silence between them felt heavy, charged. "She's seeing Kevin Riley," Dale stated without preamble, his voice low, steady, as they passed a swing set. "From the office, sales department." Jed felt a fresh wave of disbelief, then a surge of anger. Kevin Riley. He remembered meeting him once at an office Christmas party, a slick-haired man with too bright a smile. "That's a lie," Jed said, his voice tight. Dale stopped and turned to face him. His eyes, though tired, held a conviction that Jed found unsettling. "I wish it was. I've seen it, Jedediah. Everybody in the office has. The way they talk, the way they linger at the coffee machine, the way he puts his hand on her arm when he laughs at something she says. It's not subtle." He continued walking, and Jed followed, his mind reeling. "They're planning something for tomorrow night," Dale went on, his tone factual, almost clinical. "Dinner and dancing at the Hilton, then a room. They talked about it openly enough that I heard it, more than once." The precision of the details was a cruel knife twist. Dinner, dancing, a room. It painted a picture too vivid, too concrete to dismiss. "Brenda thinks you'll accept it," Dale added, looking straight ahead, his hands shoved into his pockets. "She said something about how you're her only experience, that you wouldn't understand, that you'd be malleable." The word malleable stung, sharp and humiliating. It implied a weakness Jed didn't recognize in himself, a profound ignorance of his own wife. He felt a sudden visceral rage, cold and dangerous. "Why are you telling me this?" Jed asked, his voice strained. He needed to understand Dale's motive, this stranger's intervention in his shattered world. Dale stopped again, leaning against an old oak tree, its leaves a fiery red. He looked out across the park at a group of children chasing a soccer ball. "My wife, she did the same thing. Ended up leaving me for a younger guy. Took everything. I lost my house, my kids, it broke me, still does." He looked at Jed then, his eyes filled with a deep, quiet pain. "I saw what was happening. I couldn't just stand by and watch another good man get blindsided. Couldn't live with myself." Jed stood there, the cool autumn wind suddenly biting through his jacket. His marriage, his life with Brenda, the solid, dependable existence he had known for nearly 2 decades, was not just wobbling, it was crumbling. The world around him truly felt as though it was tilting on its axis, and he was losing his balance. The air felt thin, his lungs struggling to pull in a full breath. The destruction of his marriage, a concept so foreign moments ago, now felt like an undeniable crushing weight. He turned and walked away from Dale, leaving the man by the oak tree. He walked until the park dissolved into city streets, until the sounds of traffic replaced the gentle murmur of leaves. He was heading home, the bitter truth settling deeper with every step. The thought of facing Brenda, of looking into her eyes, felt like an impossible task. He had no idea what he would say or what he would do. Jed grappled with Dale's words, the terrifying realization that his marriage might be over. His mind immediately retreated to painful childhood memories of his father, Hank, a womanizer and alcoholic. His mother, Alice, suffered in silence through Hank's open affairs, consistently claiming, "I love him." He vividly recalled Hank taking him to a girlfriend's house at age 11, the long walk home, and telling Alice. Alice's quiet confrontation was followed by Hank's belt whipping of Jed for a broken plate, a punishment Jed knew was for snitching. Jed resolved then that he would never endure his mother's humiliation. He would not condone Brenda's actions. He decided to act proactively, drawing on his sales career experience to anticipate and not wait. He envisioned the worst-case scenario, then determined a course of action he could accept. His first step was to find a private investigator, choosing one randomly from the phone book. Within 30 minutes, he was in the PI's office, laying out his suspicions and intentions. 2 hours later, a plan was in motion, costly but necessary, instilling in him a grim determination. Driving home, the weight of his secret plans settled as he contemplated how to act normally around Brenda. He resolved to feign ignorance, allowing her plans to unfold, unwilling to give her a chance to deny or postpone. He arrived home to Brenda's customary kiss and hug, making his chosen deception profoundly harder. Dale's words echoed cold and clear in the quiet hum of the truck cabin. A fair, dinner, dancing, a room at the Hilton. The thought was a stone in his gut, heavy and inert, yet threatening to explode. His marriage to Brenda, the bedrock of his adult life, was not just threatened. It was, in Dale's telling, already gone. A chasm opened, not between him and Brenda, but within Jed himself. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about the humiliation, the public knowledge Dale had described. The office, everyone knew. That was what truly twisted the knife. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The memory rose unbidden, a phantom limb ache from his childhood. His father, Hank, a man who smelled of whiskey and cheap cologne, a man whose presence filled a room with unease. Hank was a womanizer, a drinker, and his mother, Alice, bore it all with a quiet, devastating silence. Jed remembered her thin shoulders, the way she would stare out the kitchen window for hours, her lips occasionally moving, a silent recitation of, "I love him." It was a mantra, a penance. She had endured his open affairs, his late nights, his blatant disrespect, always finding a way to forgive, or at least to carry on without complaint. He couldn't understand it then, and he certainly couldn't now. He was 11. The air was cold, biting his ears as he walked home. Hank had taken him on a Saturday afternoon to visit a friend. The friend turned out to be a woman, not much older than Alice, with a laugh too loud and a house too bright. Hank had gone inside, telling Jed to wait in the truck. An hour later, he was still waiting. Another hour. He finally knocked, and Hank, his face flushed, had come to the door, handed him $5, and told him to catch a bus home, son. Jed had walked. The $5 stayed in his pocket. It was 6 miles long and cold and humiliating. He could still feel the ache in his young legs, the sting of tears he refused to shed. When he finally got home, Alice was waiting. He told her everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and anger. Her face remained impassive, only her eyes, dark and wounded, betraying her pain. She simply nodded. Later that night, there was a quiet conversation, too soft for Jed to hear, between his parents. The next morning, Hank found a broken dinner plate in the sink, already swept up and disposed of. He dragged Jed to the kitchen, his belt already in his hand. The whipping was for the plate, Hank claimed, for being careless. But Jed knew with the cold, clear certainty of a child who saw too much, it was for snitching. It was for telling his mother. He had promised himself then and there that he would never be like his mother. He would never endure that kind of humiliation, that quiet suffering. He would never, under any circumstances, condone Brenda's actions. No, this would not be his story. The decision solidified, a hard, cold knot in his chest. In sales, he always anticipated, always acted. He didn't wait for the customer to call. He made the call. He didn't react to problems. He engineered solutions. This situation, though personal, demanded the same proactive approach. He needed to understand the worst-case scenario, then develop a plan he could live with, a path forward that salvaged his dignity, if nothing else. His eyes scanned the road ahead. A thought sparked. Proof. He needed proof. Undeniable, objective proof. He pulled into a gas station, bought a local phone book, and flipped to the P's. Private investigator. The first name on the list, a faded ad for Archer Investigations, felt as good as any. He dialed the number. 30 minutes later, he was sitting across a battered metal desk from a man named Frank Archer. The office was small, smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper. Archer was a thick-set man with a neatly trimmed gray mustache and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. Jed spoke calmly, factually, outlining his suspicions. Dale Miller's warning, the Hilton, Kevin Riley. He kept his voice level, devoid of the tremor that still lurked beneath his composure. I need to know for sure, Jed finished, staring straight at Archer. And I need it documented, irrefutable, whatever it takes. Archer listened, nodding occasionally, sketching notes on a pad. He quoted a price, higher than Jed expected, but not unreasonable for the scope of work Jed described. 2 hours later, Jed walked out with a signed agreement, a grim determination set in his jaw. The plan was in motion. Costly, yes, but necessary. Necessary for himself, for the 11-year-old boy inside him who swore he'd never be his mother. Driving home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows, the full weight of his secret plan settled. He had to act normal. He had to face Brenda, share dinner, discuss the day, and pretend he knew nothing. He couldn't let her suspect. He needed this to play out. He couldn't give her a chance to deny it, to postpone, to weave a tale. He needed the truth, raw and unvarnished, caught in the act. He had to let her walk into it. He pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same, inviting. Brenda met him at the door, a smile on her face, a customary kiss and hug. "Rough day?" she asked, her hand resting on his arm. His chosen deception had begun, and it was already harder than he could have imagined. Jed and Brenda sat down to dinner, Jed having fried the pork chops as part of their usual domestic ritual. Acting normal proved agonizingly difficult for Jed, every smile and shared glance feeling like a deliberate lie. Brenda, conversely, appeared completely unperturbed, exhibiting either masterful acting or genuine confidence that Jed wouldn't object. Around 11, Jed went upstairs to prepare for bed, discovering Brenda already asleep. He showered and got into bed, but sleep remained elusive, his mind racing with the unfolding drama. At 6 the next morning, Brenda rose, dressed, and headed downstairs, adhering to her usual routine. Jed watched her go, the normalcy of the scene now a chilling charade. His private investigator, Frank, contacted him, confirming that surveillance on Brenda and Kevin Riley was underway. Jed felt a knot tighten in his stomach, the reality of the situation becoming undeniably concrete. He went to work, attempting to focus on RV sales, but his thoughts were consumed by Brenda and Kevin. The day dragged, each minute stretching into an eternity of agonizing anticipation. He made an excuse to his boss, leaving work early, his ability to concentrate completely gone. Jed returned home, the house quiet, awaiting Frank's inevitable call with updates. The silence was deafening, amplifying his anxiety and the heavy weight of impending discovery. The smell of frying pork chops filled the kitchen, a familiar comfort that now felt alien, almost mocking. Jed stood at the stove, tongs in hand, turning the meat in the pan. Brenda sat at the kitchen island, idly scrolling on her phone, occasionally looking up to offer a comment about her day. "Kevin in sales closed that big account," she said, her voice light. "He's really making a name for himself." Jed grunted, a non-committal sound, and focused on the sizzle of the fat. Dinner was a charade. He asked about her day, listening with a carefully constructed neutrality. He managed a smile when she told a small, amusing anecdote about a customer. Every interaction, every shared glance, felt like a deliberate lie, a betrayal of his own churning gut. His throat felt tight, his jaw aching from the effort of maintaining a pleasant facade. He cut his food into small pieces, pushing it around his plate, barely tasting the salt and pepper he'd seasoned it with. Brenda, however, was a picture of serene normalcy. She ate with her usual appetite, talked freely, her eyes bright. She laughed at one of his forced jokes. There was no flicker of nervousness, no hint of a secret. Either she was a masterful actress, capable of a deception so complete it was terrifying, or she genuinely believed Jed would not object, that he was indeed as malleable as Dale had suggested. The thought made a cold anger curl in his chest. Around 11, Jed went upstairs. He found Brenda already in bed, her back to him, breathing softly, apparently asleep. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb her, though a part of him wanted to shake her awake, to demand answers. He undressed, showered, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in his shoulders. He slipped into bed beside her, the mattress dipping slightly with his weight. Sleep remained elusive, a distant shore he couldn't reach. His mind was a frantic engine, replaying Dale's words, picturing Brenda and Kevin Riley, envisioning the Hilton. He stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the tree outside dancing faintly on the plaster. At 6 the next morning, Brenda stirred. Jed, who had finally drifted into a fitful slumber an hour or so prior, was instantly awake. He watched her through half-closed eyes as she rose, dressed in her sensible work clothes, gathered her purse and keys, and headed downstairs. Her routine was a clockwork precision, a comforting rhythm that now felt chilling, a prelude to a performance he was not meant to see. He waited until he heard her car pull out of the driveway, then he got up. He made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the island, the same spot where Brenda had so casually mentioned Kevin Riley the night before. His phone vibrated. Frank Archer. "Morning, Jedediah." Frank's voice was gravelly, professional. "Just calling to confirm. We've got eyes on Brenda and on Mr. Riley. Both left for work, separate vehicles, standard routes. We'll be watching. Call you when there's movement or anything definitive to report." A knot tightened in Jed's stomach, cold and hard. This was it. The abstract threat was now a concrete reality, a plan in motion, surveillance teams in place. He thanked Frank and hung up. The reality of it was almost unbearable. He went to work. The RV dealership was quiet that morning. He sat at his desk, staring at a brochure for a new motorhome, its sleek lines and promise of adventure mocking his own stagnant, imploding life. He tried to focus on sales figures, on inventory, on anything. But his mind was a broken record, playing Brenda and Kevin, the Hilton, dinner, dancing, a room. He pictured their easy smiles, their shared jokes, the intimate space that would soon become theirs. His stomach churned with a dull, persistent ache. The day dragged, each minute stretching into an eternity. Noon passed, 1 o'clock. 2. No calls from Frank. He tried to sell an elderly couple on the benefits of a larger kitchen in their travel trailer. But his voice felt hollow, his words lacking the usual conviction. He kept glancing at his phone, willing it to ring. At 3 o'clock, he couldn't take it anymore. His concentration had evaporated entirely. He walked into his boss's office. "Feeling a bit under the weather, sir," he said, feigning a cough. "Think I need to head home. Rest up." His boss, a good-natured man, waved him off with a sympathetic nod. "Go on, Jedediah. See you tomorrow." Jed drove home, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the empty passenger seat. The house was quiet, too quiet. He walked through the silent rooms, the familiar space now imbued with a sense of impending doom. He poured himself a glass of water and sat in the living room, staring out the window, waiting. The silence of the house was deafening, amplifying his anxiety, the heavy, suffocating weight of what he was about to discover. Jed was home alone, the stillness of the house profoundly unsettling as he waited for Brenda's call. Brenda called, her voice light, casually mentioning she would be out late with colleagues for a work event. Jed played along, feigning understanding and nonchalance, but tasting a profound bitterness. Frank, the PI, began sending real-time updates. Brenda and Kevin Riley had met. They were reported arriving at the Hilton, heading directly into the restaurant for dinner. Later, Frank reported them on the dance floor, laughing and holding each other close in a public display. The confirmation stung, a physical ache in Jed's chest, solidifying the betrayal Dale Miller had warned him about. Frank's final update, Brenda and Kevin went up to a room together, the door closing on Jed's hopes. Jed endured a long, torturous night awake, haunted by images of Brenda and Kevin in the hotel room. He battled a torrent of emotions, consuming anger, profound sadness, and a deep sense of humiliation. The next morning, Brenda returned home, composed and seemingly unbothered, her work event apparently a success. She offered a brief, vague account of her evening, then headed to the shower, oblivious to Jed's knowledge. Jed made coffee, the bitter brew mirroring the cold, hard reality that had settled in his soul. He reaffirmed his resolve. His next steps must be deliberate, calculated, and entirely devoid of emotion. The quiet of the house pressed in on Jed. The digital clock on the microwave glowed 6:17 p.m. The absence of Brenda's usual evening presence, the clatter of pots, the low hum of her music felt like a void. He walked from the living room to the kitchen, then back again, his steps echoing slightly on the hardwood. He poured himself another glass of water, the ice clinking loudly. His phone vibrated. Brenda. He let it ring twice before answering, trying to make his voice sound natural, easy. Hey, honey. Brenda's voice was light, almost cheerful. Just calling to let you know I'm going to be out late tonight. Kevin and I and a couple of others from the office are having a late work event. Dinner, some drinks, client stuff. Might even be dancing. Don't wait up. She laughed, a bright, unconcerned sound. Oh yeah, Jed managed, his throat tight. Sounds busy. All right. Don't worry about me. You have a good time. The words tasted like ash in his mouth, a bitter lie he was forced to swallow. He asked a couple of bland questions about the client, and Brenda provided equally bland, vague answers. It was a well-worn script, played out with effortless ease. He hung up, the phone feeling heavy and cold in his hand. The charade was sickening. He sat down, staring at the muted television screen. The first text came minutes later, from Frank. Subject: Brenda and Mr. Riley met at their office parking garage. Departed in Mr. Riley's black sedan. ETA Hilton, 7:05 p.m. Jed's stomach tightened. It was happening. The words Dale Miller had spoken were no longer a warning, no longer a suspicion. They were unfolding in real time. He felt a strange combination of dread and a grim validation. A second text followed quickly. Arrived at Hilton, entered main lobby, proceeded directly to hotel restaurant. Observed taking a table for two. Dinner, just as Dale had said. Jed closed his eyes, picturing them. The easy conversation, the shared smiles. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe slowly. He had known this was coming, had even set it in motion, but the confirmation still hit like a physical blow. Hours later, his phone buzzed again. It was almost 9 o'clock. Subjects now on dance floor. Observed close physical contact, laughter, general affectionate behavior. Public display. Photos taken. Jed pictured it. Brenda in Kevin Riley's arms, their bodies swaying to some unknown tune. Laughter. Affection. The images burned behind his eyelids, searing into his mind. He felt a deep, profound ache in his chest. A sickening twist that was part anger, part profound sadness, and entirely humiliating. He was sitting alone in his quiet house while his wife of 18 years, danced intimately with another man. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was vivid, irrefutable, caught by a stranger's lens. The final text came just before midnight. Subjects observed entering elevator on 2nd floor, proceeded to 7th floor, observed entering room 714. Door closed at 11:58 p.m. Surveillance will maintain until morning. Further updates then. Room 714. The door closing. It was definitive. It was over. Whatever hopes he might have unconsciously clung to, whatever denial he still harbored, shattered into 1,000 pieces. He didn't need photos of what happened behind that closed door. The fact of it was enough, more than enough. Jed didn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, the space beside him empty. Images flashed relentlessly. Brenda and Kevin in the restaurant, on the dance floor, entering the elevator, the closing door. He felt a torrent of emotions. A cold, consuming anger that settled deep in his bones, a profound sadness for the loss of a life he thought he knew, and a humiliation so deep it made his skin crawl. He thought of his mother, Alice, and her quiet endurance. No, this would not be him. He would not be that man. The first rays of dawn were just touching the horizon when he heard the familiar sound of Brenda's car in the driveway. He closed his eyes, feigning sleep. She came into the bedroom, moved quietly. He heard the rustle of her clothes, the gentle click of the bathroom door. A few minutes later, she emerged from the shower, wrapped in a towel, humming softly. She walked over to his side of the bed, leaned down and pressed a light kiss to his forehead. "Morning, sleepyhead," she whispered, her voice still light. "Work event went well. Got home late." She offered a brief, vague account, something about closing a deal and celebrating with the team before heading to her closet. She seemed utterly composed, unbothered, oblivious to the fact that his entire world had been watching her every move. Jed got up, went downstairs, and started the coffee maker. The rich, dark brew smelled potent, bitter. It mirrored his soul. The man who had gone to bed last night was gone. A colder, harder version remained, steeled by absolute certainty. He knew what he had to do. His next steps would be deliberate, calculated, and entirely devoid of emotion. Jed maintained his poker face for several more days, allowing Frank to gather irrefutable evidence. Frank delivered a package containing photos and detailed reports, leaving no room for denial. Jed felt a chilling calm, a profound detachment as he processed the indisputable proof. He planned a direct, unemotional confrontation, carefully choosing his moment after dinner one evening. Jed sat Brenda down, initiating the conversation by inquiring about her recent late work nights. Brenda, visibly caught off guard, offered a hesitant, slightly defensive response, a flicker of guilt in her eyes. Jed then deliberately placed the stack of photos, face down, on the coffee table between them. His voice steady, he stated, "I know about Kevin. I know about the Hilton." Brenda's face drained of color, her carefully constructed composure crumbling instantly. She attempted a panicked denial, then quickly shifted to a desperate plea, trying to explain her actions. "Jed, you're the only man I've ever been with. I just wanted to experience something else," she sobbed. He recalled Dale Miller's earlier words about Brenda's conviction that he would understand. Jed calmly reiterated his stance on infidelity, detailing his childhood trauma from his father's affairs, emphasizing his unwavering boundary. The room filled with a heavy silence, broken only by Brenda's quiet sobs, the truth hanging between them like a shroud. For 3 more days, Jed wore his poker face. He ate dinner with Brenda, asked about her day, even laughed at her jokes. The ordinary rhythm of their life continued, but for Jed, every interaction was a calculated performance. He needed more. He needed ironclad proof, a file so dense with undeniable facts that no amount of tears or excuses could penetrate it. He let Frank work. The package arrived by courier on Thursday morning, a thick manila envelope, sealed tight. Jed waited until Brenda left for work, then opened it at the kitchen island. Inside were dozens of photos, time-stamped and clearly labeled. Brenda and Kevin Riley at the Hilton restaurant, leaning close, their hands occasionally touching. Brenda and Kevin on the dance floor, bodies pressed together, her head resting on his shoulder. Brenda and Kevin entering the elevator. Brenda and Kevin, a blurry shot, their backs to the camera, stepping into room 714, the door just closing behind them. There were also detailed reports, transcripts of hotel registers, credit card receipts from the Hilton bar and restaurant, all compiled with a meticulous, brutal efficiency. Jed felt a chilling calm. No anger, no surge of pain, just a profound detachment, as if he were reviewing a business report, not the shattered remains of his marriage. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no room for denial, no space for doubt. He decided to confront her that evening. Not in a fit of rage, not with accusations. He would be methodical, precise. He would not give her the advantage of surprise, nor the upper hand of emotional theatrics. After dinner, he cleared the dishes, poured them both coffee, and led her to the living room. The TV remained off. The silence was palpable. He sat on his armchair, Brenda on the sofa opposite him. He began, his voice level, almost conversational. "So these last few late work nights of yours," he started, watching her closely. "How have they been, really?" Brenda stiffened, a subtle shift in her posture. She avoided his gaze for a moment, then met it, a flicker of something. Guilt, surprise, in her eyes. "Oh, she said, a slight hesitation in her voice. "Busy, lots of client stuff. Kevin and I, the sales team, were really pushing for that big year-end bonus." Her words came out a little too quickly, a little too rehearsed. Jed reached down beside his chair. He picked up the thick stack of photos, held them for a moment, then placed them face down on the coffee table between them. The thud of the paper on the wood seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Brenda," Jed said, his voice still steady, calm, "I know about Kevin. I know about the Hilton. I know about room 714. Brenda's face drained of color, as if all the blood had suddenly left it. Her carefully constructed composure, the practiced nonchalance, crumbled instantly. Her eyes darted from the stack of photos to Jed's face, then back again. A small gasp escaped her lips. "Jed, no, you don't understand," she stammered, her voice thin, panicked. "It's not what you think. It was a mistake. Just once, I swear." Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears. She reached for his hand, but he kept his hand still, resting on his knees. Her denial quickly morphed into a desperate plea. "Jed, please. You're the only man I've ever been with. We got together right out of high school. I just, I just wanted to experience something else, just to know what it was like. It didn't mean anything. It's you, Jed. It's always been you." Her voice broke into quiet sobs. He heard the echoes of Dale Miller's words. "She thinks you'll accept it, that you're her only experience, that you'd be malleable." Jed shook his head slowly. "Brenda, we've talked about this before. You know my stance. You know what my father put my mother through." He kept his voice even, devoid of accusation, yet unwavering. "I told you when we got married. I told you I would never, ever live that kind of life. I will not be my mother. I will not endure that kind of public humiliation, that quiet suffering." He looked at the stack of photos. "This isn't something I can simply understand or accept. This is a boundary, Brenda, and you crossed it." The room filled with a heavy, suffocating silence. Brenda's quiet sobs were the only sound, the truth hanging between them like a shroud, heavy and inescapable. For a moment she was utterly broken, exposed. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Brenda was utterly devastated, tearfully pleading for Jed's forgiveness, attempting to rationalize her choices. Jed, however, remained unyielding, hardened by the undeniable evidence in his past experiences. He told her he needed time, his voice devoid of emotion, leaving no doubt about the finality of his decision. Jed explained his intentions regarding the house, which legally belonged to his mother Alice, and stepfather Jean. He arranged a meeting with Alice and Jean, presenting them with the irrefutable proof of Brenda's affair. His mother and stepfather were deeply shocked and angry, feeling a personal sense of betrayal from Brenda. Alice and Jean agreed to evict Brenda, giving her a firm, short deadline to move out of their property. Jed meticulously began the financial separation, closing joint accounts and canceling shared credit cards. He consulted a lawyer, initiating divorce proceedings, preparing for the legal unraveling of their marriage. Jed calmly informed Brenda of his parents' decision and her impending eviction from the house. Brenda was stunned by the swift, comprehensive, and seemingly merciless nature of his response. "Jed, you're kicking me out after all we've been through?" she cried, incredulous. "You chose this, Brenda, not me. There are consequences," he replied, his voice steady. He instructed his PI to discreetly provide information about Kevin Riley's conduct to Brenda's insurance company. Brenda was utterly devastated. Her pleas were a torrent of tears and half-formed excuses, desperate attempts to rationalize her choices. "Jed, please don't do this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I can fix it. We can fix us. Just tell me what to do. I'll quit my mom. I'll never see him again. Please, Jed, forgive me." She reached for the photos on the table as if she could make them disappear, erase the evidence with her touch. But Jed remained unyielding. The tears, the desperation, they held no sway over him. He had seen his mother's tears, heard her broken pleas years ago. The evidence in front of him, the cold, hard facts, coupled with the ghosts of his past, had hardened him. There was no going back, no softening. "I need time," Jed said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. "I need to think. This isn't something that just disappears. This isn't a mistake you fix with an apology." The finality in his tone left no room for argument, no hope for a reprieve. He walked away, leaving her sobbing on the sofa, the stack of damning photos between them. The house, their house, wasn't truly theirs. It belonged to his mother, Alice, and his stepfather, Jean. They had bought it years ago as an investment, renting it to Jed and Brenda for a token sum, a gesture of support when they were starting out. That was an important detail, a crucial detail. The next morning, Jed arranged a meeting. He sat across from Alice and Jean in their sunlit living room, their faces etched with concern. He laid out the manila envelope, the same one Frank had delivered. He didn't speak for a moment, letting them open it, letting them see the photos, read the reports. Alice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Gene's face darkened, a muscle ticking in his jaw. As they looked through the undeniable proof, their shock morphed into anger, a personal sense of betrayal. They had known Brenda since she was a teenager, had welcomed her into their family. "I can't believe this," Alice whispered, her voice trembling. "Brenda, how could she?" Gene slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair. "The nerve of that woman, doing this to you, Jedediah, after everything." He looked at Jed, his eyes firm. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm filing for divorce," Jed stated, his voice calm, "and I need her out of the house, your house." Alice and Gene exchanged a look. "She'll have to," Gene said, his voice resolute. "This is our property. We'll give her, what, a week? 10 days? Alice nodded, her expression grim. 10 days, that's more than fair. She brought this on herself. With his parents' agreement secured, Jed began the meticulous process of financial separation. He went to the bank, closed their joint savings and checking accounts, transferring his share into a new solitary account. He called the credit card companies, canceling all shared cards, informing them of the impending divorce. He wanted a clean break, as swift and surgical as possible. His next call was to a divorce lawyer, recommended by a colleague. He laid out his case, presenting Frank's detailed evidence. The lawyer listened, nodding, already envisioning a straightforward process. The legal unraveling of their 18-year marriage had begun. Later that evening, Jed returned home. Brenda was in the kitchen, her eyes still red-rimmed, but she seemed to have regained some composure. She looked at him expectantly, perhaps hoping for a softened stance. "Brenda," Jed said, his voice quiet, steady, "I met with my mother and Gene today." Her face paled. "Oh," she breathed, her hands clutching the countertop. "They've seen the evidence," Jed continued, his gaze unwavering. "They're evicting you from the house. You have 10 days to move out." Brenda stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, then a dawning horror. The swiftness, the comprehensiveness, the seemingly merciless nature of his response hit her with the force of a physical blow. "Jed," she cried, her voice cracking, "you're kicking me out? After all we've been through, this is our home." "It's my parents' home, Brenda," Jed corrected, his voice still calm but with an underlying steel. "And no, it's not us doing anything. You chose this, not me. There are consequences to choices, and these are yours." He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the quiet hum of the refrigerator. His last act for the day was a text to Frank. "Please discreetly forward all information regarding Kevin Riley's conduct, specifically the Hilton incident, to Brenda's insurance company's HR department, anonymously." Brenda, her eyes swollen and red, left the house, taking only a few bags, her world in ruins. Jed observed her departure, the house now feeling emptier, yet somehow cleansed of deceit. News of Brenda's affair and Jed's uncompromising response quickly rippled through their small Midwestern community. Kevin Riley faced professional repercussions at Brenda's insurance company, a direct result of the PI's discreet information. Brenda struggled to find new housing and faced social ostracism, shunned by many in their social circle. She made desperate attempts to contact Jed, sending texts and emails, but he blocked all communication. Dale Miller reached out to Jed, offering quiet support and solidarity, a silent nod of understanding. Jed proceeded with the divorce, which, aided by the clear evidence, was relatively straightforward and uncontested. He experienced profound moments of sadness, mourning the loss of the life and the dreams he built with Brenda. He acknowledged the pain he inflicted on Brenda, but maintained a conviction that his actions were necessary for his own preservation. A strange, quiet peace settled over Jed, a grim satisfaction mixed with the heavy weight of his decisions. He began to reevaluate his entire life, his goals, and the path ahead, now solitary. Jed found solace in his work, selling high-end RVs, burying himself in the predictable rhythm of his job. He grappled with the morality of his choices, wondering if his pursuit of truth made him too harsh, too unforgiving. On the 10th day, Brenda left. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn. She carried 2 duffel bags and a small box of personal items. Her car, packed tightly, pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. Jed watched from the living room window, a silent observer. The house felt emptier, undeniably. But also, he thought, cleansed. The air seemed lighter, scrubbed clean of the lies that had filled it. News travels fast in a small Midwestern community, especially news of a marriage dissolving so abruptly, so completely. Whispers started, then solidified into facts. Brenda's affair, Jed's uncompromising response, the eviction, it became common knowledge. People took sides, mostly in hushed tones, but the lines were drawn. Kevin Riley, Jed later heard through the grapevine, faced professional repercussions. The discreet information from the PI had landed on the right desk. An internal investigation, a reprimand, a demotion. His career trajectory at the insurance company had stalled, perhaps permanently. Brenda, on the other hand, found herself in a far more difficult situation. Her apartment search was slow and disheartening. Social ostracism was swift and pervasive. Friends they had shared for years suddenly had conflicting schedules when she called. Invitations stopped coming. The comfortable social circle they had built together had largely closed its doors to her. She tried to contact Jed. Texts arrived, long and pleading, filled with apologies, explanations, and renewed promises. Emails appeared in his inbox, heartfelt and desperate. He read none of them. He blocked her number, marked her emails as spam. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to hear. The conversation had ended the moment she chose room 714. One afternoon, Jed's phone buzzed. It was Dale Miller. "Just checking in, Jedediah," Dale said, his voice quiet. "Heard things were moving along." But there was no judgment, no gloating, just a quiet support, a silent nod of understanding from one man who had been through a similar fire to another. Jed thanked him, brief and sincere. The divorce proceeded with a methodical pace. With Frank's detailed evidence, it was relatively straightforward. Brenda, overwhelmed and without much legal standing, did not contest it. There were no children, no complex assets to fight over. The settlement was simple, clean. Their marriage was legally dissolved, as cleanly as a surgeon's cut. In the weeks and months that followed, Jed experienced profound moments of sadness. He mourned, not for Brenda as she was now, but for the Brenda he thought he knew, the life they had built, the dreams they had shared. He'd catch himself reaching for her hand across the dinner table or turning to share a thought, only to be met by empty space. The absence was a dull ache, a constant phantom limb. He acknowledged the pain he had inflicted on her, the harshness of his actions. He hadn't set out to destroy her life, only to preserve his own. But he maintained a conviction that his actions were necessary. Necessary for the boy who walked 6 miles home in the cold, for the man who promised himself he would never suffer his mother's silent humiliation. It was self-preservation, he told himself, not vengeance. A strange, quiet peace settled over him, a grim satisfaction, perhaps, that he had faced the betrayal head-on and had not flinched. But it was mixed with the heavy weight of his decisions, the stark reality of his new solitary life. He began to reevaluate everything, his goals, his path, what it meant to be alone after so long. He spent long hours at the RV dealership, burying himself in work, selling high-end RVs, pitching the dream of the open road, of freedom and new horizons, felt almost therapeutic. The predictable rhythm of his job, the tangible act of closing a deal, offered a solace he couldn't find elsewhere. Sometimes late at night, in the quiet solitude of his house, he grappled with the morality of his choices. Had he been too harsh, too unforgiving? He wondered if his unwavering pursuit of truth had made him cruel. The answer remained elusive, caught somewhere between the pain of betrayal and the fierce need to protect himself. Months turned into a year. The divorce was finalized, marking a stark, quiet end to their long history. Brenda attempted to build a life with Kevin Riley, but their relationship was strained by the professional and social fallout. Kevin's career suffered significantly, and he slowly began to resent Brenda for the exposure and the ruin of his reputation. Jed heard through the local grapevine that Brenda and Kevin's relationship eventually dissolved, unable to withstand the pressure. He felt no triumph, only a quiet, weary resignation, the victory tasting hollow. Jed continued to live in the house, now truly his own space, a monument to his hard-won independence. He dedicated himself fully to his work, finding a steady rhythm and purpose in his sales. Jed began seeing a therapist, processing the deep emotional trauma of Brenda's betrayal and his own severe response. He realized that while he successfully avoided his mother Alice's fate, he still carried significant emotional scars. Friends and family took sides, creating awkward social divides. But Jed learned to navigate the small-town gossip with stoic dignity. He had a chance, accidental encounter with Brenda in town. A brief, silent exchange of haunted looks was all that passed between them. The weight of what happened, the choices he made, and the person he became remained a constant companion. He understood that some wounds never fully heal. They simply integrate into the fabric of who you are. Jed learned that moving on doesn't mean forgetting, but learning to live with the indelible marks of the past. Months bled into a year. The divorce was finalized, a stack of legal papers and a judge's signature marking a stark, quiet end to 18 years of shared history. No fanfare, no dramatic courtroom scenes, just a bureaucratic conclusion to a life that had unraveled in spectacular fashion. Brenda, Jed heard through the sparse, reluctant reports of mutual acquaintances, had tried to build a life with Kevin Riley. Their relationship, however, was strained, heavy with the weight of the professional and social fallout. Kevin's career had suffered significantly. The demotion, the sideways glances from colleagues, the loss of trust from clients, it all mounted. He slowly began to resent Brenda, the source of his exposed conduct, the ruin of his once promising reputation. Eventually, the local grapevine confirmed it. Brenda and Kevin's relationship dissolved. It simply couldn't withstand the pressure, the constant whispers, the professional and personal wreckage they had built together. When Jed heard the news, there was no triumph, no surge of vindication, only a quiet, weary resignation. The victory, if one could call it that, tasted hollow. It had cost too much. Jed continued to live in the house. It felt truly his own now, a space defined by his choices, a monument to a hard-won, if lonely, independence. He had bought it from Alice and Jean, a fair market price, settling the financial entanglement cleanly. He kept it neat, perhaps too neat, the furniture precisely arranged, the surfaces gleaming. He dedicated himself fully to his work at the RV dealership. The predictable rhythm of sales, the tangible success of moving a luxury motorhome, offered a kind of steady purpose. He was good at it, better than ever, channeling his focus into the meticulous details of deals, the psychology of customers. It was a distraction, a way to bury himself in something concrete. The quiet, however, became too much. The echoes of his own thoughts, the persistent mental replays of the past, drove him to seek help. He began seeing a therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Evans, in a small office downtown. He talked about Brenda, about his father Hank and his mother Alice, about the boy who walked 6 miles home. He talked about the anger, the cold calculation, the necessity of his actions. He came to realize that while he had successfully avoided his mother Alice's fate, the passive endurance of betrayal, he still carried significant emotional scars. The avoidance of one kind of pain had led him to inflict another, on Brenda and on himself. He was not the suffering victim, but he was not entirely unblemished either. The cost of his unflinching resolve was deep. Friends and family had taken sides, as was inevitable. There were awkward social divides, conversations that stuttered into silence when certain names were mentioned. Jed learned to navigate the small-town gossip with a stoic dignity, offering no explanations, seeking no sympathy. He simply carried on, a man defined by his own choices, for better or worse. One crisp autumn afternoon, he was at the local grocery store pushing his cart down the cereal aisle. He turned the corner, and there she was. Brenda, her hair was shorter, a little grayer, her face thinner, lines etched around her eyes he didn't recognize. Their eyes met. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. No words were exchanged, no accusations, no apologies. Just a brief silent exchange of haunted looks, a shared recognition of the profound damage done. Then she turned her cart, and he turned his, moving in opposite directions, the gap between them widening once more. The weight of what had happened, the choices he had made, and the person he had become remained a constant companion. He understood that some wounds never fully healed. They simply integrated into the fabric of who you are, a part of the landscape of your being. Moving on, he learned, didn't mean forgetting or erasing. It meant learning to live with the indelible marks of the past, carrying them forward into a future that was entirely his own, shaped by the hard-won lessons of truth and consequence. Another year passed, and Jed firmly established a new, solitary routine, rebuilding his life piece by painful piece. He engaged in new hobbies and reconnected with old friends, forging a different, more independent social existence. Jed reflected on his arduous journey, acknowledging profound pain, unwavering resolve, and hard-won quiet peace. He gained a deeper, more cynical understanding of loyalty and trust in human relationships. Jed recognized that while Brenda paid the price for her infidelity, he also paid a heavy price in the loss of his innocence and faith. The idealism of his first marriage vanished, replaced by a sober, pragmatic wisdom about life and love. Cautiously, he began to think about the future, tentatively considering the possibility of dating again someday. He visited his mother Alice, finding comfort and shared understanding in their quiet conversations about life's hardships. Jed acknowledged that his severe actions were ultimately necessary for his own emotional well-being and sense of self-worth. He emerged a changed man, forged in the crucible of infidelity and betrayal, stronger but irrevocably altered. He learned that true strength involves confronting pain head-on and finding a way to move forward. The enduring, sometimes harsh, Midwestern landscape mirrored his newfound resilience and stoic acceptance. Jed understood that life, much like field seasons, cycles through hardship and quiet growth. The story concludes with Jed, alone but whole, looking toward a quieter, more honest future, having reconciled with the cost of truth. Another year slipped by, folding into the one before it with the quiet hum of time. Jed had by now firmly established a new solitary routine. The house, once filled with the ghosts of a shared life, now felt entirely his own, a canvas for his meticulously rebuilt existence. He woke early, drank his coffee in silence, and went to work. His evenings were spent differently. He had picked up woodworking, the smell of sawdust a grounding counterpoint to his thoughts. He reconnected with old friends, men from high school whose marriages had endured or, like his, fractured. They talked less about wives and more about fishing, about the weather, about the quiet shifts in their lives. He was forging a different, more independent social existence, one where his identity wasn't solely tied to a partnership. He often reflected on his arduous journey, especially during those long, quiet evenings in his workshop. He acknowledged the profound pain, the deep cut of betrayal, but also the unwavering resolve that had carried him through. There was a hard-won, albeit quiet peace now. It wasn't the boisterous joy he'd once envisioned for his life, but a steady, unshakable calm. He had faced the storm, and he had not broken. From the wreckage, he had gained a deeper, more cynical understanding of loyalty and trust in human relationships. The easy assumptions of youth were gone, replaced by a pragmatic awareness of human frailty and the unpredictable nature of desire. He recognized that while Brenda had indeed paid the price for her infidelity, in the loss of her marriage, her home, her social standing, he too had paid a heavy price. The loss of his innocence, his unquestioning faith in the person he had chosen to spend his life with, was an invisible wound that would never fully heal. The idealism of his first marriage was gone, scattered like dust. In its place, a more sober, pragmatic wisdom about life and love had taken root. He no longer believed in storybook endings, but in the slow, deliberate work of building something real, something that could withstand the inevitable pressures and temptations. Cautiously, tentatively, he began to think about the future. The idea of dating again, of allowing another person into the carefully constructed quiet of his life, was a distant, almost abstract thought, but it was there, a faint flicker of possibility on the horizon. He made it a point to visit his mother Alice more regularly. Their conversations were quiet, often circling back to life's hardships, to the ways people disappointed you, and the ways you learned to carry on. There was a shared understanding between them now, a silent recognition of battles fought and survived, though their wars had been waged with different weapons. He saw in her eyes the endurance he had once disdained, but now understood as a different kind of strength. Jed acknowledged that his actions, though severe, though they had caused significant pain, were ultimately necessary for his own emotional well-being and sense of self-worth. He had broken the cycle, refused to become the man his father had been or the man his mother had endured. He was a changed man, undeniably, forged in the crucible of infidelity and betrayal. Stronger, yes, but irrevocably altered. He had learned that true strength wasn't just about avoiding pain, but about confronting it head-on, tearing down the illusions, and finding a way to move forward, even when the path was scarred. The enduring, sometimes harsh, Midwestern landscape surrounding him mirrored his newfound resilience and stoic acceptance. The fields that weathered blizzards and droughts, then yielded their harvest. The long, flat horizons that promised both endless possibilities and quiet solitude. He understood that life, much like the seasons of those fields, cycled through periods of hardship and periods of quiet, sometimes invisible, growth. Jed stood by the window, watching the last light of a summer day fade. He was alone, but he was whole. He had reconciled with the cost of truth, understood that sometimes the most painful choices were the only ones that allowed you to reclaim yourself. He looked toward a quieter, more honest future, carrying the indelible marks of the past, but no longer defined by them. Jed stood by the window, watching the last light of a summer day fade into the Midwestern sky. The journey had been long, marked by the sharp, clean break of betrayal and the meticulous reconstruction of a life. He was no longer the naive husband, trusting implicitly. The man who stood there now was seasoned, hardened by the choices he had made, both for himself and against Brenda. He had learned that truth while a powerful weapon carried its own heavy cost. It had revealed the fragility of trust, the ease with which a shared history could be dismissed for a fleeting desire. He hadn't sought revenge, not in the traditional sense, but a cold, exacting justice that had dismantled Brenda's world as thoroughly as she had dismantled his. This wasn't triumph, it was simply the consequence. The house was quiet, filled with his solitude. He was alone, but for the first time in a long time, he felt truly whole. The scars remained, a part of his story, but they no longer dictated his path. He had confronted the ghost of his father, the silent suffering of his mother, and forged a different legacy. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but it was his, built on solid ground, cleansed by a hard-won honesty.